Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Rikki Schlott.
Wow, thank you so much, Lisa, and to everyone at ALEC for inviting me to speak today. It's an honor and also quite honestly a shock because, as Lisa said, just 6 months ago, I was your typical college student, kind of keeping my head down, hiding my Thomas Sowell books under my bed in a desperate attempt not to get canceled. I was always quietly political, but suddenly going along to get along became untenable when a formative life event happened, the pandemic. For the first time in my relatively short life, I saw my liberties eclipsed, and in their absence, I realized that I had been taking them for granted all along. I, like most young Americans, grew up essentially basking in freedom, and suddenly I realized just how profound, how unfathomably unique in the scheme of human history that privilege was. So as the pandemic dragged on, I decided to speak out, and since then I've been published in the New York Post, the Wall Street Journal, and Reason Magazine, becoming a sort of de facto mediator between Zoomers and Boomers. And so in that spirit, I'm here today as a voice for Generation Z, those of us born between roughly 1997 and 2012. And let me be the first to say we have a pretty bad reputation. We're often characterized by our extremist fringes who erect safe spaces in our classrooms and cry closets on our campuses. But I come bearing good news. I promise you we're a lot more moderate than you think. While I may be unique among my peers in the publicity of my views, since speaking out, friends and acquaintances have come out of the woodwork to express their support. In my work, I've looked deeply into Generation Z to see who we are, how we think, and what we care about. And if there's one thing I'd like to say to you today, it's this. Dismissing us as a radical, progressive monolith is a mistake, both statistically and strategically. Here's why. The window of our political awareness is narrow. We came of age in the so-called lesser of two evils era of American politics. We watched as our communities and our Thanksgiving tables were torn apart by partisanship, and as such, we're disillusioned with the system before ever participating in it. Perhaps unsurprisingly then, we're twice as likely than the general electorate to be registered independents. Nearly half of us are. And while campuses get a radical reputation, over 40% of college students consider themselves moderate. Plus, we're far more conservative than millennials were at this point in their lives, with about a fifth of us registered red. On account of our formative political experience, we're open, receptive, and skeptical independent thinkers. I would argue we might just personify the pendulum swing back to critical thinking and normalcy we've all been so anxiously anticipating. I'm also not alone among my peers when I say the pandemic has been a life-defining event. We're a notoriously coddled generation, having been showered with gold stars and participation trophies since day one. But suddenly all that has changed. In the past year, the rug was pulled out from under our feet before we ever had them solidly on the ground. All we've taken for granted about our futures has been called into question. In fact, since the pandemic, 40% of us report rethinking our educational and career paths. Six-figure debt for a degree in feminist dance theory becomes somehow less palatable in a pandemic. As such, we've had no choice but to buck the status quo and call into question the very institutions in which we traverse. Simultaneously, as draconian lockdowns have dragged on, we've been exposed to the ugly side of big government. Despite our statistically negligible risk for COVID-19 complications, policymakers have insisted on acting in conflict with science. Administrators, union leaders, and the politicians in their pockets have imprisoned us in our bedrooms, attending school through computer screens and effectively robbing us of a formative year. At the same time, we become wise to the ugly economic consequences of interventionist policy. Arbitrary restrictions placed on businesses have crippled the job market we face and effectively strangled the strong economy we were set to inherit. In short, bad policy has been breathing down our necks in virtually every sense. And last, but certainly not least, we've watched as education has morphed into indoctrination. We're bombarded from all sides with evangelizing political messaging from professors, peers, and administrators alike. All the while, campus vigilantes enforce the ever-evolving contours of acceptable speech, chastising nonconformists like me in the process. It's an attack on free speech and free minds unlike anything ever seen before. So clearly, there are a lot of factors at play. But where does that leave us? Well, for better or for worse, the pandemic has been Generation Z's defining event. We've been shaken from our slumber as we form our worldviews, and we're questioning institutional integrity at every sense. Though about 2/3 of us report being afraid to speak our minds politically, there's some paradoxically good news in that fact. Our squeakiest wheels might be the loudest, but there's a silent plurality, if not majority, just waiting to be spoken to. Though disillusioned and disoriented, Generation Z is open, independent, and receptive, quietly waiting to be reached out to. As such, the post-pandemic era presents the perfect moment for leaders to reach out to young voters like me. So what is it that Generation Z needs? Actually, it's quite simple. We're looking for a voice of reason in the age of alarmism. We need calm, composed leadership willing to take the thumb of big government off the scales and to champion our futures. Because most of all, we need our freedoms restored. Our fundamental rights to live as we please, to say what we wish, to come into our own authentic selves. Our founding fathers enshrined those rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And now, 250 years later, Generation Z's formative and sudden alienation from that freedom has clarified its sanctity. I hear it time and again. Of all the conversations I've had with my contemporaries, one has stuck with me the most. My friend Christopher, who had only just recently come around to questioning the political status quo, told me this. I'm at a point where if standing up for free speech and civil liberties makes me a conservative, well, I guess I'm a conservative. Consistently, I hear this desperation echoed by my peers. So, although your first instinct may be to dismiss the youngest among us as a progressive monolith, to do so is a mistake. We're silently pining for the restoration of our freedoms and for the restoration of our faith in our nation. We're begging for a guiding hand to reach out. So don't lose your hope in us, because our hope for a better future lies with you. Thank you.